Well, we are here. I hope I'm sharing this with everybody. We have an opportunity to learn more about Bastrop history. I am Ken Kesselis, and Kay Sapikis, our great CEO director, has a meeting of importance to the Historical Society that took her away. So she thought I could introduce myself, Ken Kesselis, and I am looking for a slide that says start from beginning, which I don't see. So we'll see if I can make this thing work some other way, which probably I can. So I am screen sharing. I have clicked on the right thing. New slide. I'll do it this way. So maybe I won't. Here we go. This is a story today about Bastrop County residents and the Texas Revolution. And that's because there's not a lot that happened in Bastrop during this time, but a great deal of the action took place with Bastrop County people involved. You will recall from the last session that Bastrop residents and the community itself had tried very hard to work for peace. But that didn't work because the military commander, General Koss, threatened a confrontation and really wanted to subdue the Texans. Stephen F. Austin returned to Texas about this time, and he concluded that the only choice left was war. So Koss wanted to provoke a confrontation. So he sent General Ugarte a message in San Antonio to send one of his companies, 150 men, out to Gonzales to retrieve a 6-pound cannon that they had given to them earlier for protection against Indians. This was Koss's way to prove superiority over the Texans. However, the people in Gonzales weren't amused. We know this wonderful story about they made a flag and said, "Come and take it." They provoked or responded to the provocation of the Mexican soldiers and fought back. They held off the troops long enough for them to send out word to the neighboring areas for help. Captain R.M. Coleman, who had a mounted rifle company in Bastrop, immediately left. The next day, Edward Burleson followed him with a number of other volunteers from Bastrop. The colonists resisted, with J.C. Neal of Bastrop firing the cannon, the little cannon, the come and take it cannon, firing the first shots of the revolution. The Mexican troops were routed and returned to San Antonio. At that point, the troops had gathered maybe 400 people at Gonzales. The volunteers elected Stephen F. Austin as commander of the Army of Texas, and Edward Burleson was lieutenant colonel and third in command. By then, Koss himself had arrived in San Antonio with his army ready to subdue the colonists. The Texans decided to march on San Antonio. There was a brief skirmish outside the town of San Antonio, Mission Concepcion, at which Richard Andrews, a Bastrop man, was the first person to die in the cause of the revolution. Koss dug in at the center of San Antonio, the Alamo compound that we know so clearly. It was a former mission, and what we call the chapel, which we now call the Alamo, was in this corner. So Koss retreated within those walls, and the Texans laid siege on the town. There were some skirmishes, but by and large, nothing happened for about a month as supplies dwindled on all sides. Austin ordered an all-out attack, but he received strong resistance from his troops. Burleson, who was now second in command, wanted to attack, but was forced to report that many in his regiment disagreed with the attack. Meanwhile, the consultation sent Austin to the United States, gathering American support for the Texas cause. The troops overwhelmingly elected Bastrop's 38-year-old Edward Burleson as their general in command. This is the only known photograph of Burleson. Burleson wanted to order an attack, but there were some things that prevented him as well. The government of Texas, the Texans, the consultation had elected Sam Houston as commander of a yet-to-be-raised army, and many assumed that he had authority over the troops in San Antonio, although it wasn't completely clear. Houston ordered Burleson to raise the siege and to go to winter quarters farther east. Many of the soldiers still opposed the action, and Burleson's army had run low on ammunition, medical supplies, and warm clothing and other essentials. But just at the moment that they were about to give up, Burleson hit on a solution that would allow him to have a firebrand, Ben Milam, volunteer to raise a group of volunteers who on their own, without authority from Burleson, would go into San Antonio. So Milam and a man named Johnson went in with 216 troops on December 5th. They attacked the town through the center of town towards the Alamo, but the troops were all in the town as well. So they had to fight with Burleson remaining behind in a reserve force and Neal commanding the Texas artillery. The fighting continued for 4 days, sometimes room to room and house to house, until Koss presented a flag of truce and surrendered to Burleson on December 10th. Burleson agreed to permit the Mexicans safe passage and enough ammunition and provisions to make the journey out of Texas, and he took over control of the fort, now Mission turned into Fort the Alamo. Koss agreed to retreat beyond the Rio Grande and never again take up arms in opposition to the reestablishment of the Constitution of 1824, which was the primary functionary of the Texans at that moment. His agreement about the Constitution of 1824 reflected the view of the consultation, as I mentioned last week, that Don Carlos Barrett led the way in favor of fighting in support of the Constitution, not a full Declaration of Independence. They were fighting against Santa Anna's declaration of autocracy, of him becoming a dictator. In the provisional government, several leaders from Bastrop served with Barrett and R.M. Williamson in necessary and important roles. After the siege of Bear and the evacuation of the Mexican army, Burleson and most other soldiers returned from San Antonio to their farms and businesses in and around Bastrop, preparing for winter and getting ready for spring plowing and planting. Bastrop area residents succumbed to the complacency, thinking the Mexican threat was behind them. Therefore, they turned their attention to their planting and to the threat of Indians. A corps of Rangers was posted in and around Bastrop with a man named John J. Tumlinson as captain and R.M. Williamson as major. On December 9th, Williamson set up headquarters for this corps of Rangers at Bastrop in early January of 1836, and he had about 60 men. Nearly everyone in the area had accepted a false sense of security, assuming that the humiliation of Koss at the Alamo would dissuade Santa Anna from further pursuing Texas, the Texans' attempted revolt, that he would give in. Instead of Santa Anna giving in and accepting defeat, he marched north with a large army toward San Antonio. At the Alamo, back at the Alamo, the Texans were led now by J.C. Neal, the artillery commander, who had taken over after Burleson left. Since many of the volunteers had gone home, his duty there, this Bastrop man, was very difficult. James Bowie, though, the famous James Bowie, was much impressed with Neal's conduct and character and praised him highly by saying, "No other man in the army could have kept men at this post under the neglect which they experienced." Neal himself vowed that if I only have 100 men, I will fight 1,000 as long as I can and will not surrender. Sam Houston, the general now of the regular army appointed by the government, ordered the Alamo abandoned and destroyed, with the troops and cannons removed to Gonzales and to the coast. Neal learned that Santa Anna would arrive overland from the Rio Grande soon, and he decided, regardless of the order, to remain at the Alamo. However, on February 11th, Neal had to return home because of illness in his family, and therefore his life was saved, but he was deprived of the place in Texas history now occupied by William B. Travis, who assumed command upon Neal's departure. The arrival of the large force of Mexicans at San Antonio awoke Texas from its state of indifference. Events during March and April of 1836 moved very rapidly. Burleson and Neal attempted but failed to take a force of men from Bastrop into San Antonio to help relieve Travis. But the Mexican army had surrounded the Alamo by then, and they were unable to make it. So they went to Gonzales instead to wait news from San Antonio. Meanwhile, on March 2nd, a new convention, now emboldened by Santa Anna's arrival at San Antonio, unanimously declared absolute and total independence from the Mexican nation, the Texas Declaration of Independence. Bastrop's J.W. Bunton, Thomas J. Gasley, and R.M. Coleman signed the declaration. 4 days later, Santa Anna captured the Alamo and executed all Texan soldiers not killed in combat. As many as 15 Bastrop residents died there. This famous painting by McCardle hangs in the Senate of the state of capital of Texas. Santa Anna later wrote that the conflict was bloody because Travis would not surrender and that his responses were insulting, which made it imperative, he said, to assault the fort before it could be reinforced. The obstinance of Travis and his soldiers was the cause of the death of the whole of them, he said, for not one would surrender. The struggle lasted more than 2 hours, he wrote, and until the ramparts were resolutely scaled by the Mexican soldiers, and the rest we know from history. Following this, Santa Anna rested his troops in an attempt to decide what to do to chase the Texans out of Texas. That was his plan. On this map, I hope you can see it well enough, but they were in San Antonio. And so the Texans were gathering here in Gonzales with Sam Houston now leading the charge and Edward Burleson second in command. Santa Anna decided to divide his armies and send them in different directions towards the United States, which would be up here. So he sent a General Guyano up this way towards Bastrop, and he was supposed to continue on to Nacogdoches and on to the United States. He sent other armies down this direction. The Ranger force had remained in and around Bastrop, guarding against Indians, but also serving as spies against any Mexican movement. But after the fall of the Alamo, everyone became alarmed, and the families, women and children, grabbed what they could and headed to the east. This was called the runaway scrape. The soldiers there helped to evacuate them. One anecdote is interesting. Margaret Wilbarger came to Bastrop from upriver and found a store open. On a board nailed to the door was a notice that customers might take whatever they wanted and pay later if they ever returned. She took what she wanted and raced to catch the others. The local men helped as best they could, including 4 who were dispatched from the army by Burleson to help with the retreat. Sam Houston began to retreat as Santa Anna with his main force followed him to the east. He'd burned the town of Gonzales to prevent them from gaining supplies. He didn't trust the frontiersmen from the Bastrop area, and he continued to retreat. Possibly he had made a deal with President Jackson of the United States that if he could make it to the Louisiana border, they would provoke a battle with the Mexicans and the U.S. troops would defeat the Mexicans. Sam Houston did not seem to be very confident that he could win the war. Meanwhile, Houston ordered R.M. Williamson to concentrate his forces at Bastrop. And when General Guyano got close to Bastrop, the 22 Rangers who were left there in the around the completely depopulated town described what happened. The river was up very high at that point, and they, of course, had to cross the river to get to Bastrop so they could continue on towards Nacogdoches. Noah Smithwick, one of the participants, told some interesting stories about this. He said that one morning we woke up and saw the Mexicans 600 strong, actually 725. We didn't stand on order, he said. They just decided it was time to go. But he discovered that one of the sentries, an old man, Jimmy Curtis, had refused to go. So Major Williamson sent him back to get him. And when he found Uncle Jimmy sitting against a tree with a bottle of whiskey beside him, as happy and unconscious of danger as a turtle on a log, Smithwick said. "Hello, Uncle Jimmy," I cried. "Mount and ride for your life. The Mexicans are on the other side and men are all gone." "The hell they are. Light and take a drink," Jimmy said. "There's no time for drinking," I said. "Come, mount and let's be off. The Mexicans may swim the river and be after us any moment." "Well, let's drink to their confusion," Curtis said. He persisted, and thinking it was the quickest way to start him, I drank with him and we struck off. Well, we can say one thing. We were about the last men to leave, but not the least disturbed. By the time Guyano crossed the river, he received a message from Santa Anna that instead of proceeding down the Nacogdoches to the road to Nacogdoches, they should all meet at San Felipe. Guyano left with his troops after he plundered Bastrop and took what he wanted, but got lost in the woods on the way there and never made it to the ensuing battle. Meanwhile, Houston continued to retreat. He was going up, as you can see this way, and most everybody thought he was going to keep on going up towards Louisiana. But the men on the top of at the front of the march just simply refused to do it. And that when they got to a fork in the road, they just headed in the direction of where the government was at that point and where they thought Santa Anna was going. So instead of pitching a fit about it, Houston followed them. The decisive Battle of San Jacinto, took place on the 21st of April, 1836. The Bastrop men, most of them, were under the leadership of this person, Jesse Billingsley. He commanded the Mena Volunteers, made up mostly of the frontiersmen from the Bastrop area. In addition to Billingsley, Edward Burleson, was now the commandant of the 1st Regiment of Texas Volunteers and overall second in command to Sam Houston. Houston clearly did not trust that Burleson's ragtag bunch of volunteers, frontiersmen, would fight. On the other hand, the leaders from Bastrop, of course, insisted that they would. One example used by Billingsley was that on the day of the attack, General Burleson, still procrastinating, finally called a council of war. After finding all unanimously determined to fight, he repeatedly asked Colonel Burleson if his men would fight. The colonel again and again assured him that he knew his men and that they would fight. At last, losing patience at the repeated insinuations as to the courage of his gallant regiment, he emphatically declared that if there was a coward in his regiment, he would shoot him down himself. The battle took place at a place where Santa Anna had trapped himself into a box where he had water on all sides. The Texans formed here, and when they finally decided to attack, it was a surprise. This little ridge here, some people think that as they marched down this way, they were not seen at first until they got to this little rise. The Mexicans were surprised. The Texans were fearless. Burleson took his men down the center of the line and over the ramparts, and the battle was a bloody and decisive one. That is not the picture I want. This is the other Senate photograph painting by McCardle. Here is an insert of it of Burleson. The guy did a great deal of research into how people were dressed and their horses. This is Edward Burleson at that battle. The battle was spectacular, and the Texans won so decisively. It was an absolute complete rout. Everybody thinks that. Let me go back to this. Santa Anna was captured, and this is another painting in the Capitol of the surrender. Here's Santa Anna surrendering to Sam Houston, who was injured. His ankle was shattered. This is Edward Burleson standing beside this flag, and this is Almonte, who was the interpreter for the event. You can't see it very well, but this is Jonathan Burleson, Burleson's brother, holding a rope ready to lynch Santa Anna. Houston thought better of it, which is probably a good idea. That's another part of the story. So just for fun, I've shown you these two battle photographs, this San Jacinto and the Alamo one earlier. And everybody thinks that everybody died at the Alamo. But I want to tell you that it's not necessarily true. Because, where am I? Nope. I need to go back. Here we go, maybe. This is right, if you can see this, you can't see it very well, but right here, that's a little right-hand section of the Battle of the Alamo. And this is a man dying down here at the base of Burleson's horse. And maybe you can tell, if I can find my insert, which I can't, I'll go back to this. They're exactly the same guy. So when I worked in the Capitol as a page, we used to tell people that this guy survived the Alamo so he could die at San Jacinto. Obviously, the author the painter didn't realize that he had used the same study. So I've overgone my time, and this is so much that can be told. That's Burleson, and this is his brother over here with the rope. So I am open for questions, and I am gonna find, I'm going to quit screen sharing, maybe, and look for questions. And if I don't see any questions, which I don't know how to find, I will ask you to, let's see, don't know. If you want to call my phone or text my phone at 512-940-7897, 512-940-7897, 512-940-7897. I may be able to get your message on my phone because I was not able to find where it says chat. No, maybe I could find it, but I don't see it. So I don't want to exit the full screen. Y'all are going to have to look at me. I hope y'all are hearing this okay. I don't see any chats. I don't see any questions, but I'm going to hang around a little bit because we have a few minutes left. And I want to say while I'm looking to see if I have any questions, Jennifer's calling me with a question. Let's see. Jennifer?
Hi.
Yeah, you got a question?
Yes, I was wondering what happened to Edward Burleson later in life?
Oh, I'll tell you all about that in future episodes. He went on to be, this is the most prominent person to ever live in Bastrop County. And I will, if you need to know for sure early, call me back after this thing. I'll tell you more about him. But there's a whole book's worth about him that John Jenkins and I produced. So very, very important man. Very valuable to our community. Q&A, maybe that's it. There's Jennifer calling me back. Jennifer, yes?
So what about Susanna Dickinson and her daughter, Angelina?
Yeah, well, she's asking me about the people that survived. Really like the slides visual there. Okay. There was a officer at the Alamo whose wife and child, a brand new, almost baby child, was with him, and a slave of Travis, who Santa Anna did not kill because he was not so bloodthirsty that he would kill women and children. And they didn't believe in slavery, and so he was very happy to save Travis's slaves. So they are the ones that carried the message to Gonzales that the Alamo had fallen. Miss Dickinson wound up, it's a very sad story. Her daughter wound up living or working, shall we say, in a brothel in Galveston. And she was called the Child of the Alamo. And the legislature in the late 1800s appropriated money from state funds to support her and to try to get her out of the trouble she was in. I may not be telling that story 100% correct, but the little baby was the Child of the Alamo, and I can't remember her name. If she was in Bastrop, I could tell you. Let's see, let me see if that's a different question. I found a thing that says Q&A. No? Maybe not. Chat. Oh, I found a chat button. Let's see what that does. Move your mouse and it will show the chat box. Too late now. Great review. Did any Keslas fight at San Jacinto? We have a long line of people who avoid wars. And at the time of the Alamo, my great-grandfather was 2 years old living in Germany. And by the time he got to be 17, I think he left to avoid the Alamo at Germany, whatever that was. Oh, I take it back. I do have on my mother's side, I have a great-great-great-grandfather who fought at the Siege of Bear. His name was James Saunders Holman. He went on to be the first mayor of Houston. And here's a great story for you about be careful what you look for. We were always proud of the fact that he was elected the first mayor of Houston when it was just formed. But my cousin John decided to search about the election. He found out that apparently somebody showed up one day and said, we were going to have a mayor. And so they went to the local saloon and just took a vote. He happened to be in there and won with 11 votes. Second place was 7 or something. So it turns out Mayor of Houston was not a big deal in the first place. So we're still proud of the old boy. He did fight in that battle in 1835 and helped capture the Alamo, so Travis and the boys would be there to die in it. Let's see. I don't see anything else. I know my time's up, and Kay would probably be anxious for me to get out of here. You can certainly leave if you want to, but I'm arrogant enough to think I should stay on and see if there are any calls or texts, which I haven't seen. I will just tell you that I have now lost my screen. So next time I'll be next month, third Thursday, February. I'll be talking about after the revolution, the rebuilding of Bastrop after it was destroyed by Indians and the Mexican army that came through, and the beginning development of Bastrop as a continuing very, very important town in Texas. I don't have I've lost my slideshow, but Kay wanted me to remind you that we have a supply of a book, Bastrop, Texas, 1874 to 1900, that it's just not about the county, but there's a lot about the county in it, but it's not a county history. It's a Bastrop city history. Every nickel of the money that goes in to buy those books goes to support the Historical Society. The books were donated. So it's not a bad one. So hope somebody will read it. There are copies in the library if you would not like to own a copy of it. I think I'm going to quit, and somebody that's a whiz on this stuff. Well, I'm going to see if there's a chat here. Well, my friend Kent Bowles says great review, so that's high praise. So anybody that knows about all this stuff might note the mistakes or the difficulty we had. I don't mind the critique on this. Let me or let Kay know. We'll try to figure out a way to do it better if there were some glitches. And I know there were glitches because I couldn't find the right button on the slideshow, but it worked okay. So I wish we had, I will say one last thing. I wish we had as many graphics going forward as we had for this one, but it's from that period of time, it is really few and far between to find visual evidence of anything. But I'll do my best because I know how much that helps and how much just looking at my face doesn't particularly help. So, okay, I'm going to do, I think, what I'm supposed to do and leave and see you next month. Thank you for tuning in and being a fan of Bastrop County history.